Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. This morning we will be considering 4 bipartisan bills to hold pharmacy benefit managers accountable and to expand the availability of low-cost generic drugs to people who desperately need them. I strongly support these bills, and I believe that they should be signed into law as soon as possible. But for anyone here who thinks that this is going to be the end of the work we do on prescription drugs, I got some bad news for you. That ain't going to be the case. This is not the end. This is the beginning. I don't have to tell any member here because I think we have the same story no matter whether we're from Kansas or whether we're from Virginia, Vermont, or Louisiana. All over this country, people are sick and tired of being ripped off by drug companies, sick and tired of paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We have an absurd, insane situation where 1 out of 4 people who go to a doctor and get a prescription can't even fill that prescription because the price of medicine is so high. What sense is that? What do? They get sick or they end up in the emergency room? That makes sense to anybody? And it's not only the impact of high drug costs on the individual. I have talked, and I recommend that everybody go to the CEOs of your major hospitals. Ask them how much they are spending on prescription drugs. Outrageous prices. 20% of their budget goes to prescription drugs. Hospital bills go up. Hospital bills go up. Healthcare bills go up. So the cost of prescription drugs, the fact that we pay by far the highest prices in the world, is one of the reasons we spend twice as much per capita on healthcare as any other nation, and yet 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. So I think it is the obligation of this committee to deal with these issues in a very fundamental way. And in fact, next Wednesday, we're going to have, I think, an historic hearing. We're going to be bringing in the CEOs of the 3 largest drug companies in the world, Eli Lilly, Sanofi, and Novo Nordisk. And in addition, on that same panel, it will be quite interesting, we're going to have the major executives of the 3 largest PBM companies in this country. That hearing next week will focus on the cost of insulin, but in addition, I think some of us want to know from these companies why the prices they charge are so outrageously high. While the bills that we are considering today will not, I think we can agree, significantly lower the price of prescription drugs, they are, in fact, an important step forward in bringing transparency, competition, and accountability to the pharmaceutical industry. What is interesting is the pharmaceutical industry pins the blame for the high cost of prescription drugs on the PBMs, and there is some truth to that. Over the past decade, the 3 largest PBMs in America, Express Scripts, owned by Cigna, CVS, Caremark, CVS, owns both Caremark and Aetna, and Optimum RX, owned by United Health, they've increased their profits by 483%. They're doing pretty well. Last year, these 3 PBMs, which manage 80% of all prescription drugs in America, made over $27 billion in profits. In 2012, they made only $6 billion of profit. Meanwhile, in 2021, 10 of the largest drug companies in America made over $100 billion in profit. So, while the pharmaceutical industry blames the PBMs for high drug prices, and the PBMs blame the pharmaceutical industry for high drug prices, the reality is both of them are right, and that is something that we've got to do. And I hope this committee is prepared to do it. As we all know, PBMs determine which prescription drugs will be covered in health insurance plans based on secret deals they negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry, how much patients will have to pay for those drugs out of pocket, and often steer patients into purchasing medicine in pharmacies they either own or prefer, a practice that is harmed, by the way, smaller independent pharmacies. The Pharmacy Benefit Manager Reform Act that I have introduced with Ranking Member Cassidy and Senators Murray and Marshall makes some much-needed and long overdue reforms to the system. Under this legislation, PBMs would be required to share more information with employers and insurance plans, pass rebates on to employers and insurance plans, and would ban PBMs from charging one price to a pharmacy and another price to an insurance plan and pocketing the difference. It has been estimated that this bill will save close to $2 billion over 10 years, lower health insurance premiums, and will help keep struggling independent pharmacies in business. This morning, we will also be considering the Ensuring Timely Access to Generics Act introduced by Senators Shaheen and Collins. This bill cracks down on the abuse of citizen petitions filed before FDA by brand name companies that delay the introduction of affordable generic medicines. CBO estimates that this bill will likely save up to $650 million over the next 10 years. We will be considering the Expanding Access to Low-Cost Generics Act introduced by Senators Smith and Braun. This bill cracks down on gaming and prohibits an anti-competitive maneuver called parking that has prevented low-cost generic drugs from coming onto the market. CBO estimates this bill will likely save at least $1.3 billion over 10 years. And we will be considering the RARE Act, S-1214, sponsored by Senators Baldwin and Braun. This bill would curb a loophole for orphan drugs and limit the scope of exclusivity based on use rather than the broader disease or condition that currently exists. That is what we have in front of us today, and I look forward to seeing these pieces of legislation passed. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair Sanders. Today we have the first legislative markup of this Congress to consider critically important legislation. I practiced for 20 to 30 years taking care of patients, uninsured, underinsured, and sometimes even well-insured. And the cost of prescription drugs could be an incredible barrier to they receiving the health care that they needed. I feel like on behalf of those patients, we are here today. While the process it took to get here was not easy, we have worked on two issues identified as key bipartisan priorities: pharmacy benefit manager reform and lowering the overall cost of prescription drugs. And I would say that I'm pretty proud of the legislation we put together. We improved upon bills that previously passed this committee to ensure that employers are best equipped to shop around for the highest quality, lowest cost health care benefits for their employees. We also bring much-needed transparency to an opaque structure in which middlemen have some sort of margin, we know not which, at the expense of customers and patients who use the service. We also push forward reforms to bring new, lower-cost generic drugs to market faster. And the solutions we have today are almost perfect examples of how we can lower drug costs without overhauling the entire healthcare system or threatening the incentives and ability to produce life-saving drugs in the future. All of this, I am concerned about the process. The chair seems to incline to abandon a carefully balanced, bipartisan piece of legislation we negotiated over the last several weeks. Did I get every policy I wanted? No. Did my side give on some things? Yes. But there are parts of this bill that I would want to be different, yes. But that is what you do when you have bipartisan negotiation. In announcing a bipartisan deal last week with the chair, I did so with the expectation that we would protect the hard work and compromise that we had put in over the last several weeks. To me, that meant honoring commitments in areas where we agreed to disagree. I'm informed that the chair intends to support the inclusion of several policies as amendments today that he and his staff had agreed to take off the table as part of a negotiated bipartisan deal essential to getting 60 votes on the floor. The overall package was negotiated in good faith on our side, with concessions made with the understanding and commitment from the chair and his staff that these policies would not be included. Now, any senator is entitled to file amendments to ask for her or his amendment to be considered. I applaud that. I don't begrudge any senator for asking for votes on an amendment. However, as leaders crafting and announcing this deal, there is an expectation that the chair and I will uphold the commitments we made in the negotiating room. That does not mean taking things off the table when we can't reach agreement, only to put them back on the table when we're here in the committee area. I am told, by the way, of the 4 amendments of which I am speaking, only one of the 4 were we given notice of the CBO score or of the technical assistance that had been rendered. And today we understand that they do have technical assistance and CBO scores. That's not the way to run a committee. I'm just saying that. And it's not the way that I build trust with my down dais that we are actually working together as a team in order to get something accomplished. At some point, process matters. And I'm sorry to be a skunk in the room. One more thing. When I get that TA and I get that CBO, I can work my down dais to make sure that they're on board, my co-sponsor, Roger Marshall, and everybody else. And then I got to go to my conference. That should happen before we show up today, not for us to find out about it today, and so now I have to go and do that. Hopefully for these particular amendments, the chair will join me in moving to table or oppose to protect the deal we carefully crafted to not only report the legislation favorably out of committee, but to pass the full Senate in strong bipartisan fashion. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Without provoking a debate, I strongly disagree with Senator Cassidy's assertions. We will now begin consideration of the following bills: S-1067, Ensuring Timely Access to Generics Act of 2023, S-1114, Expanding Access to Low-Cost Generics Act of 2023, S-1214, the RARE Act, and S-1339, the Pharmacy Benefit Management Reform Act. All of these bills have bipartisan support, and I appreciate Senator Cassidy and his staff working with us to bring these bills before the committee today. For the awareness of all senators and staff, we intend to roll all votes until the end. I'm hopeful that voting will start around between 11:30 and 12. I think we have a vote on the floor at 11:30. We will stay in touch with staff and members with timely updates. Similar to what has been done in prior Health Committee markups, and after consulting with Ranking Member Cassidy, I would like to suspend quorum rules today to facilitate our discussion on these bills. So I ask unanimous consent to suspend Health Committee Rule 4, requiring a quorum of 1/3 of the membership of the committee to be present for the purpose of speaking on these bills and any amendments to these bills only. Are there any objections? Without objection, so ordered. I would also like to ask my colleagues to limit remarks to 2 minutes, and when recognized, please specify the bill and the amendment number that you're offering and speaking on. We will now go to S-1067, the Ensuring Timely Access to Generics Act of 2023, and we will have a manager's amendment. Without objection, the manager's amendment, in the nature of a substitute, will be adopted by unanimous consent and be considered original text for the purpose of further amendment. Are there any objections? So ordered. Are there any members who wish to speak or offer an amendment to S-1067?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, just one comment on process. I think it would have been very helpful to the committee had we had the hearing, which is scheduled with the pharmaceutical CEOs and the PBMs prior to this markup. I would have really appreciated had the chairman just flipped the dates of those two. Having said that, I do want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for the work that you're doing on some extraordinarily important issues. And I appreciate your including on the agenda the Ensuring Timely Access to Generics Act. This is a bill that I have introduced with Senator Shaheen. Our bill would increase competition from generic drugs through better oversight of the FDA's so-called citizen petition process. Although intended to serve the public by bringing safety concerns to the attention of the FDA, brand name manufacturers, however, were behind roughly 92% of all of the citizen petitions that were filed between 2011 and 2015. Overwhelmingly, these petitions were considered shams as they did not raise legitimate safety concerns. And that's why the FDA throws out 9 out of 10 of these petitions. Despite the low success rate, petitions are still able to cause delay in the entry of generics, and they also divert FDA resources. Both the Trump and Biden administrations have identified the submission of sham citizen petitions as a threat to timely approval of generics and competition in the market. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb said that manipulation of the process can add to regulatory burdens on generic drug review process and the FDA's regulatory decision-making, and generally slows down the approval of the process. Our bill would strengthen the FDA's ability to reject so-called petitions, citizen petitions, if the agency believes that the primary purpose of the petition is to delay approval of the generic competitor. If enacted, this bipartisan bill will improve competition and save patients money. Those are goals that we all share. I urge a yes vote on the bill.
Further discussion? Senator Collins makes some very important points on a very important issue. What I would say, however, is I think the senator knows the FDA has raised some concerns about how this legislation could make it harder for them to quickly review applications of low-cost biosimilars. Please.
Mr. Chairman, forgive me for interrupting. I think that is on an amendment that I was about to propose, and you are correct that we have not yet received, this is very frustrating, technical assistance on Collins Amendment number 1, which is an amendment to encourage greater biosimilar competition in order to lower list price and out-of-pocket costs for patients. Biosimilars are highly similar versions of biologics like insulins. So think of them as generics for biologics. And they are a promising category of lower cost medications, and the average price of a biosimilar is 50% less than the reference brand biologic price. Because of the issue that you have raised, I am willing to not discuss my important amendment at length, even though I think it's extremely important. It is part of the Insulin Act legislation that I've introduced with Senator Shaheen. We are the co-chairs of the Diabetes Caucus, which I've founded in 1997. And what I would suggest is that I not proceed with offering with my biologics, my biosimilar amendment, which is Collins Amendment number 1, and that we just proceed to pass the citizens' petitions bill.
Well, Senator Collins is dealing with a very important issue. No ifs, buts, and maybes. We'll work together. We'll get this passed.
Thank you.
Are there any other members who wish to speak or offer an amendment to S 1067? Anybody else? This, therefore, concludes consideration of S 1067 and its amendments. As a reminder, we have notified members that we will vote on bills and amendments at the end of the entire process. We will now consider S 1114, the Expanding Access to Low-Cost Generics Act of 2023, and we will have a manager's amendment. Without objection, the manager's amendment in the nature of a substitute will be adopted by unanimous consent and be considered original text for the purpose of further amendment. Are there any objections? So ordered. Are there any members who wish to speak or offer an amendment to S 1114?
Yes.
Senator Paul.
I think it's important when we look at these bills to understand that sometimes we have unintended consequences of this. Everybody wants lower prices. Everybody says, well, if a generic's in the space, if they don't get in a certain period of time, it's occupying the space, let's let a second one in. But if you let a second generic in, there's a possibility that you're deterring the first generic, and you deter the whole situation of getting the generics involved. Sometimes generics are tied up in litigation from the name brand drug. They can be tied up for 33 months sometimes, and so you may well let somebody in, a second generic in, but it may actually be a disincentive to the first generic, if they're both tied up in this. So I will oppose this bill, and I think it may not make the situation better. I think there's a possibility it makes the situation worse.
Thank you. Any other discussion on 1114? Senator Cassidy?
Yeah, I am going to support this bill. I think it strikes a delicate balance to help more generic products come to market in a timely way, and also protects the 180-day exclusivity as an important incentive. And under this bill, additional manufacturers could bring products to market if the first filer does not do so within 33 months of receiving approval, and the subsequent manufacturer is otherwise ready for a timely launch. And it addresses the fact that there's some market abuse here. There are some people who don't bring their generic to the market when they could. The CBO estimates that this will save at least $1.3 billion over 10 years. At some point, we've got to start doing things that save money if we have a fiscal crisis. And we've got a fiscal crisis. And you can say 1.3 billion in Washington isn't very much, but the Cub Scouts like to say if you add up the ounces, if you pay attention to the ounces, the pounds add up. If we pay attention to the billions, then maybe the trillions will add up.
Okay. Are there any other members who wish to speak or offer amendments to S 1114? This, therefore, concludes consideration of S 1114. We're now moving to S 1214, the RARE Act. There is no manager's amendment for this bill. Are there any members who wish to speak or offer an amendment to S 1214? Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair Sanders and Ranking Member Cassidy, for your work on this markup. And I just wanted to speak to the bipartisan RARE Act, which I've introduced with Senator Braun. Our bill would help of the Orphan Drug Act and will continue encouraging drug development for rare diseases. It will codify FDA's long-standing interpretation of the orphan drug exclusivity, and it will prevent disruption in the orphan drug market. Before passage of the Orphan Drug Act, research and development into drugs for rare diseases had largely been neglected by the pharmaceutical industry. Unfortunately, a recent court decision has called into question FDA's interpretation of this landmark law. Without a fix to affirm FDA's longstanding interpretation of the orphan drug exclusivity, we can expect significant delays for orphan drug development for children, for the elderly, and patients with comorbidities who tend to be studied later in the drug development process. Our bill seeks to provide certainty for special patient populations who suffer from rare diseases, and I encourage my colleagues to vote in support of the RARE Act.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Hassan.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank you and the ranking member for this markup and your work on this legislation. I have 3 amendments to offer to this legislation, and I assume I should take them up one at a time. I'm offering my amendment, Hassan number 1, which would incorporate my bipartisan bill with Senator Paul, Braun, and Hickenlooper, the Increasing Transparency in Generic Drug Applications Act, into the Retaining Access and Restoring Exclusivity Act. This amendment will help lower prescription drug prices and bring needed financial relief to patients by getting generics to market faster. Our common sense measure will help lower prescription drugs and, according to the CBO, which has scored it, reduce the deficit by nearly $1 billion over 10 years. For certain generic drugs, manufacturers must show that their formulation has the same concentration of inactive ingredients as the brand name product. When a generic manufacturer's application has a different concentration of an inactive ingredient, the FDA cannot disclose to the applicant how to adjust it. As a result, manufacturers must engage in a guessing game, repeatedly resubmitting applications until they land on the right concentration. This process unnecessarily delays the launch of generic drugs by months or years, depriving patients of the significant savings that accompany market competition. Drug prices can drop as much as 20% when the first generic is made available and up to 85% when multiple generics are released. This amendment, which we work closely with the FDA on, would allow the FDA to identify discrepancies in the concentration of inactive ingredients so that companies that are working to make generics can avoid guessing games and unnecessary delays. Last year, this committee showed its commitment to lowering drug costs for patients and passed this amendment with a strong bipartisan vote. I look forward to continuing to work with the chair and ranking member on these issues. I'll urge my colleagues to support this amendment and will ask for a vote on it at the appropriate time.
Discussion on Hassan 1. Senator Paul.
I'm a co-sponsor of this amendment, support this amendment. I think it's a great idea and will lower drug prices. Really, nobody should have to play a guessing game with their regulator just to bring safe and effective products to market. There's no other regulated industry that works that way. Imagine if the state of California was allowed to say to car manufacturers, sorry, your new model doesn't meet our emission standards, but we won't tell you what the emission standards are. Better luck next time. This is just about providing information. This is the way it always was done up until 2015. This was changed not by Congress. This was changed by the FDA. We're supposed to be in charge. If we want generics to come forward, if we think generics lower prices, let's give them the information so they can meet the standards. This is simply Big Pharma wanting to stop generics to come forward. And so I think it's a very good amendment. I think it has a very good chance of lowering prices. There's some argument saying, well, this is invasive of intellectual property. The problem with that argument is this all begins after your intellectual property has expired. This is after your patent expires. You're trying to bring a generic forward, and then they won't tell you, did you have a little too much of this inert ingredient, a little too little, for goodness sakes, let's tell them what what they're doing and help them to get there. Here's a good example of the gamesmanship that this amendment will stop. It happened with Restasis, a prescription eye drop to treat dry eye. All of its patents expired in 2014, but generic companies had to spend nearly a decade going back and forth playing a guessing game with the FDA while the price of Restasis kept going up and up every year. By the time a generic got to the market, the price of Restasis had gone up 250%. That's not the real marketplace. What we're trying to get to is more of a marketplace. I wholeheartedly support this amendment. It passed 17-5 last time, so I think those who voted last time ought to explain, why they aren't going to vote yes this time. It's a very good amendment, and I think will help the bill. Thank you.
Further discussion on Hassan 1.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Hickenlooper.
I would just say ditto. I think there's no need to beat the dying horse, but this is obviously a bipartisan amendment that would relieve the American people of an unnecessary delay.
Further discussion, Hassan 1. Senator Cassidy.
And this is one of the amendments that unfortunately was taken off the table and which we agreed on a bipartisan basis to not negotiate, for which I've not had the ability to vet with people in my broader conference. It's unfortunate. I think that's probably one of those who voted for this last time. And if you ask my reason why, at some point, process matters. I agree with Senator Hassan offering this. That's what I would do if I was a senator. But I suspect she would say if she were a ranking member and she would feel as if something had been taken off the table in a bipartisan negotiation and the morning of we're informed that she'll go forward anyway, that she would have some concerns about that. I do too. I told Senator Hassan, bring it up later. We're going to have other hearings. We heard that at the beginning. I will work with her to make sure that it works on my side. But unfortunately, I cannot tell her that now because it was taken off in our bipartisan negotiations. At some point, process matters.
Further discussion, As Senator Cassidy indicated earlier, every member of this committee has a right to bring forward amendments. And as it happens, there are amendments that we're going to be voting on today that were brought forth in time, but after the staff had ended negotiations. Senator Hassan, is that it for Hassan 1? All right, Hassan 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also offering Hassan 2, which would incorporate my bipartisan bill with Senator Braun, the Ensuring Access to Generic Medications Act, into the Retaining Access and Restoring Exclusivity Act. This amendment would empower generic manufacturers to challenge brand name manufacturers that overstate the scope of certain patents to keep out competition. Manufacturers can patent new uses of existing drugs with so-called method of use patents. For instance, Rogaine was developed to treat high blood pressure, but was later repurposed and patented to treat hair loss. Sometimes, when the patent for the original use of the drug has expired, the manufacturer can misuse a new method of use patent to create barriers for generic competitors. In these cases, the FDA relies on the manufacturer's summary of its method of use patent and its protected uses, and manufacturers exploit this deference by overstating the reach of these patents in order to block new generic drugs. This amendment will give generic companies the rights to challenge these unfair practices, encouraging fair competition and fair drug prices for patients. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I will ask for a vote at the appropriate time.
Discussion on Hassan 2. Any discussion?
This is another amendment of which I discussed, and on this one, the CBO score, neither the CBO score nor the technical assistance was shared with my staff or our down dais. Now, this has bipartisan support. I understand that. But my job is to be able to tell my members in good faith that we send the CBO score and the technical assistance and to my broader committee. I cannot say that, and for that reason, I must oppose this.
And just to be clear here, we did work with the FDA, which supports this amendment, and the CBO has indicated that it is either cost neutral or might have modest savings.
Further discussion on Hassan 2. I don't see any. Hassan 3.
And thank you. Finally, Hassan Amendment 3 to S1214 would incorporate my bipartisan bill, another bipartisan bill with Senator Braun, the Increasing Prescription Drug Competition Act, into the Retaining Access and Restoring Exclusivity Act. This amendment will improve drug competition by stopping brand name manufacturers from using patents on safety protocols to block generic drugs from coming to market. The FDA requires certain drugs to have in place risk evaluation and mitigation strategies known as REMS. These safety protocols are essential to protecting patient health. But drug companies are currently incentivized to exploit the system by patenting these REMS to gain additional months and years of exclusivity and, in turn, sky-high profits. There have been several high-profile cases of brand-name drug makers using REMS patent protections to block generic competitors, including a case in which the company Jazz Pharmaceuticals blocked a competitor from bringing a narcolepsy treatment to market, allowing Jazz to maintain a near monopoly on narcolepsy drugs. Our proposal would stop pharmaceutical companies from exploiting the patent and approval system by ensuring that a drug company cannot use a REMS patent to prevent or delay FDA approval or commercial sale of a competitive product. The legislation will also create a private cause of action for generic companies in cases where brand name companies do not appropriately identify a REMS patent when reporting to the FDA. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I'll ask for a vote at the appropriate time.
Discussion on Hassan 3. Senator Braun.
This would be a discussion about all three proposals, and this would be directed at the ranking member. Do you, Senator Cassidy, outside of the process and the technicality of it, support the essence of these amendments?
In fact, I think I've voted for these in the past, may have been a co-sponsor. But I will point on the one that was just referred, we still have not seen a score or technical assistance. And so it's one thing to be down dais, but it's another thing to be a ranking member to have to represent a score and a technical assistance process to all of you. That's my responsibility, and I've been unable to fulfill that responsibility.
And by the way, I'm going to be interested in that as well. You know that. But if all of that falls in place down the road, you'd technically support all three of these amendments, two of which you've supported before.
On a personal level, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
And again, if I may, Mr. Chair, the CBO did work with us, the FDA did work with us. The FDA supports this amendment, and the CBO has indicated that this would be cost neutral or, again, perhaps modest savings.
And if I may, why in the heck were they not shared? Was all that information not shared with us? That's the frustrating thing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm having kind of a hard time understanding why this gang can't shoot straight. I mean, what kind of leadership do we have, Mr. Chairman? If you and the ranking member can't coordinate with the information we need prior to the vote being called. We all support these amendments, and yet you had an agreement with the ranking member that hasn't been followed through. Republicans did not receive the technical report, the CBO report. That's part one. Part two is we're having a hearing with PBMs after we mark up the bill on PBMs. That doesn't make any sense. And then we have another hearing this Thursday at 1 o'clock, which is, I've never heard of a hearing at 1 o'clock. I'm sure it's happened before, but it's kind of unusual, showing respect to other members. Some have to go long distances this weekend and are going to be gone. I can't quite figure out what's going on here. But coming back to the point at hand, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do when there are three amendments I agree with, and yet the ranking member, the leader of my party on this committee, has said that this violates an agreement. What's happening?
What's happening is that members have a right to offer an amendment which is widely supported by members on both sides of the aisle. What's happened is there was a lot of discussion, and there was an agreement that there would certain amendments, Hassan amendments, Baldwin amendment, would not be part of the package, leaving them the right to go forward. What also happened is there was no discussion on two important amendments that will be discussed here after the discussion ended. That's what happened. And if you don't, I have disagreements with Senator Cassidy on his characterization of what happened, period.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Mr. Chairman, I support all three of the senator from New Hampshire's amendments. I am, however, puzzled why the chairman spoke against my amendment to the Shaheen-Collins bill, the first bill on the agenda, on the basis that we had not yet received the official guidance from the FDA and CBO. It seems to me that Senator Hassan's amendments are in exactly the same situation. So I'm wondering why the chairman said we can't proceed with Collins' amendment number 1 because we don't have the official response from FDA and CBO, but gee, we can proceed with the 3 Democratic senator amendments, which, as far as I can tell, are in exactly the same situation. I think all 4 are valuable, good amendments, but I'm trying to understand why my amendment was treated differently. And I tried to accommodate the chairman by withdrawing my amendment to my own bill, but it was in exactly the same posture.
Well, what I would say to Senator Collins, her bill and her amendment are very important, and I think they should and will be passed. The only difference, Senator, is that we did receive information from the FDA that they had concerns that I think can be worked out. That's the difference. We did hear from them. Further discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Can I just ask a question? I'm kind of reluctant to blunder into this because lawyers are told not to ask questions they don't know an answer to. But I'm going to ask what I don't know the answer to. It would seem to me the goal would be to get this bill out of committee with as much momentum as possible so that it has the greatest likelihood on the floor. It's a little unusual to be in a posture where we have some people today who are voting against amendments that they actually kind of want to vote for. And we also might be in a position where people might vote for some amendments that, based on either the hearing Thursday or next week, they might realize, well, maybe I should have voted against it. And I'm worrying that the ordering of the hearings could compromise the ability to maximize a vote total coming out of this committee to get the momentum to put it on the floor. We're in the middle of a good discussion here, and I don't think we should terminate the discussion. I think we should present amendments again in the discussion. I'm really looking forward to the hearing. As you know, I really am excited about the hearing next week. We're using insulin as an example. We have both PBMs and pharma manufacturers, and we can ask them questions. And some of the amendments that are going to be offered, I think, are very much kind of to be informed by that discussion. So I guess the question I'm asking is, could we stay at this discussion, get all these issues out on the table, let people propose amendments, but actually not do the vote on the amendments in the bill until after we have the two substantive hearings? That will also open up the time so that, to the extent that the FDA or CBO have suggested things that not everybody has, we can get all that information in their hands. But again, I'm just thinking about people who have said, I voted for this last time, I'm likely to vote for it again, but I'd like to get the information to make sure that I should vote that way. So could we have the discussion, talk about the amendments, do the hearings, and then do the vote?
Let me say this about timing. Senator Romney raised the issue. On the 10th, we're going to have, I think, an historic hearing. And if you think it is easy for us to bring the 3 CEOs of the leading pharmaceutical companies in the world together at one time, along with the 3 top executives of the PBM at the same time, if you think we can say, oh, let's do it this day or that day, it ain't so easy, all right? So we had to accommodate the schedules of all 6 of these people, and that's why we had that important hearing. Further discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Braun.
I think Senator Kane's point makes perfect sense. We shouldn't be forced into a vote today when you see so much confusion about what you're voting for or against, and I don't think it makes any difference when we actually take the vote, and I'd love to have that hearing and have full discussion, delay the vote. So I'd be in favor of what the senators proposed.
Senator Paul.
I tend to agree with a lot of those who think that we should hear information before we vote. There's some fundamental questions for which there are facts on both sides, and these are very difficult and technical issues. Why are prescription drug prices different than electronics or other consumer items? Why do they go up and other prices go down? There's a fundamental question there you have to analyze, and we might not come to the same agreement. But there's another fundamental question. Do PBMs raise or lower prices? And I think some people want to get rid of PBMs, don't realize you might get rid of PBMs, the prices might go up. But I'd like to hear from people who do the PBMs. You're going to ban spread pricing. Well, I've been told that spread pricing, if you're an employer buying your insurance for your employees, it's actually cheaper to buy the spread pricing. So a lot of employers, smaller employers, actually do buy the spread pricing. You're going to ban something that is the cheaper alternative that actually might be lowering prices. It's not as simple. This is not a really simple subject, but I'd sure like to hear from all of these people in the normal way where you'd hear from them and then we'd vote after we hear the information.
All right, my inclination is to delay the first 3 votes on the first 3 bills, but vote on the PBM bill. Are there any other discussions of Hassan 3? All right, let's go to S 1339, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager Reform Act. We'll now consider that bill, and we have a manager's amendment. Without objection, the manager's amendment, in the nature of a substitute, will be adopted by unanimous consent and be considered original text for the purpose of further amendment. Are there any objections? So ordered. Are there any members who wish to speak or offer an amendment to S 1339?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Baldwin.
I would offer Baldwin 1. I know there are some robust discussions happening in the chamber as we debate these measures, and I will let you know at the conclusion of those discussions whether or not I will ask for a vote on this amendment. But let me speak to the amendment prior to making that determination. This is a bill that I author with my colleague, Senator Braun. It's a freestanding bill as well as an amendment. We have had it, we've offered it in prior Congresses, and it has had a bipartisan favorable vote from many of the members of this committee in 2019. I believe it does not suffer from the lack of a CBO score or technical assistance language as some of the others have. But let me just talk about the content of the amendment and as there are discussions about whether we can bring this up maybe in bill form at a future markup. First of all, I just want to thank Senator Braun for all of his work and for joining me on the Fair Drug Pricing Act. We were successful in 2019, and our bill, this very same text, was approved by this committee on a strong bipartisan vote. And I hope that we will have that same outcome either today or very soon. Our amendment would require basic transparency for drug companies that so often jack up the price of prescription drugs with no explanation. We've seen it time and time again, and it harms our constituents. American taxpayers are also footing the bill for the rising costs of drugs, and it is only fair to call on drug companies to share more information about why they are increasing prices for the drugs that our constituents depend upon. Our amendment would require drug companies to provide a transparency and justification report 30 days before raising the price of a drug by more than 10% in a single year, or by more than 25% over a 3-year period. As I mentioned, the text of this amendment is identical to what was passed out of this committee during the debate on the Lower Health Care Costs Act. That markup, it was supported by the chair, the ranking member, as well as my colleagues, Senators Romney, Collins, and Murkowski. Again, enjoys very strong bipartisan support. And I guess I would ask the chair and ranking member, and obviously with the consent of my co-author of this amendment, if we have some confirmation that we can have this bill come up freestanding in a future markup, I would agree to withhold a vote today, but we want to know that it's going to come up.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Romney.
I find it difficult to explain to the American public how it is that we decided to vote on legislation affecting the pharmaceutical industry and the PBM industry without having hearing from the pharmaceutical industry and the PBM industry. Particularly when, as you point out, you've got the CEOs. It's a remarkable accomplishment to get the 3 major CEOs of the largest drug companies to come here and testify. We're going to have them come in after we've marked up the bill. I simply don't understand it. And as a result, I'm making a motion to adjourn this markup until after the PBM hearing, which happens next week on May 10th.
I second that.
I call for a vote.
I would strongly disagree with that. Because as I indicated, Senator Romney, you want to talk about explaining to the American people. What you're going to have to explain is why we, in some cases, pay 10 times more for a prescription drug. Well, let me finish, all right, than other people. And this committee intends to address that in a way that we have not seen in recent years. Now, what the ranking member and I agreed upon is this date for a hearing, the legislation that is before us. I am open to an idea of postponing if there is a support for postponing a number of the votes on a number of the bills. That's fine. I think we should vote on the PBM bill and not adjourn this meeting. I've got a lot of work to do on this committee, and I would hope we can go forward in that direction. Further discussion?
Can I ask, though, point of portion of privilege?
Yeah.
If Senator Romney has made that motion and Senator Mullins has seconded, Is that, so to speak, privileged? I don't know what our parliamentarian would say, in which that mandates a vote. I'm asking, I don't know that. I'm representing my dais.
Well, as a matter of fact, we agreed, as you know, to roll all votes until the end.
So we would vote on that at the end.
Because we waived the rules.
I got it. No, wait.
Well, do we have,
Not on a motion.
No, I'm not sure that's true.
well, let me find, do we? Yes. All right, then I would put that vote to the end.
Mr. Chair, might I suggest that we recess and talk this through before we vote on the motion?
Any objection to that? Okay, thank you. We'll do that.
Okay.
What? Okay. All right, recess. Subject to the call of the chair. Now that we're all in agreement about everything, we're all having a great morning. Senator Cassidy and I have chatted. Senator Schumer has chatted. I think the Republicans have chatted. Democrats have chatted. And I think we have reached a resolution. And I would ask unanimous consent that the markup recess, this markup recesses until 10 a.m. May 11th, and that the deadline for filing amendments, including new or modified amendments, be at no later than 8 p.m. May 10th. Fair enough? Are we all happy? Senator Romney, you happy? All right, good. All right, look, bottom line here is, look, guys, I know we've had disagreements today, but I think Senator Cassidy and I, Senator Collins, all of us want to accomplish important goals. So let's go forward together. All right, thank you all very much. We're adjourned. Thank you.